Brain and Personality, or the Physical Relations of the Brain to the Mind, by Hanna Thomson. Chapter 2. Account of the physical basis of the mind. Two fundamentally opposite conceptions have existed about the relations of the brain to the mind, which may be illustrated by comparing the brain to either one of two different instruments or mechanisms for producing music, an Aeolian harp or a violin. Thus, if the brain may be regarded as an organ from which thoughts proceed, the question then becomes, do thoughts arise in it as musical sounds flow from an Aeolian harp, or as they come from a violin? Both the Aeolian harp and the violin are constructed by threads of catgut stretched over apertures in a wooden box. The music of the Aeolian harp comes from it when it is placed where currents of air can flow through its threads, and its notes.
To listen to the complete audiobook for free, check Amazon Audible. Link can be found in the description or the first comment.
Currents of air can flow through its threads, and its notes will then vary according to the direction, the strength, and the velocity of the currents. The air which generates the music is a part of the whole outside atmosphere, and while each harp has its own peculiarities of size, number of threads, position, etc., its function source has no peculiarity, but is one and the same in all. In like manner, some hold, currents of thought are excited in the brain by the incoming sensation transmitted from without by the vibrations of the various nerve fibers, which are specially adapted to receive impressions, and these vibrations in turn awaken those responses among the fibers and cells of the brain, which constitute feelings and ideas. On this view, a man's brain may be regarded as a specially constructed mechanism whose individual peculiarities in its working, as shown in his daily life, are all due to the arrangement of its material component parts. Some leaves give forth long, rich, harmonious, not true. Others, from unhappy disposition of their fibers, give forth little else than prolonged discords, and others a strange mixture of both. But all these individual or so-called personal characteristics are matter of cerebral structure, as this is acted upon by the innumerable nerve stimuli proceeding from the outer world. More or less defined conceptions of this kind about the relation of the brain to the mind are quite prevalent, particularly among those who emphasize the influence of heredity in the genesis of individual or moral traits. The logical conclusion of this position is that the mind of the last analysis is the product of the composition and properties of brain matter, and its operations of whatever sort are reactions among the brain elements to the play of external forces. The other and essentially different conception is that the brain, if likened to a musical instrument, resembles a violin in that, however good it be as a musical instrument, and however carefully it has to be constructed in all its parts to become such an instrument, yet of itself it cannot give forth a musical note, much less take part in a complex symphony, without a musician to use it. Therefore, though no musicians can give us violin music without a violin, so no violin can be musical without a musician. It should be noted that this theory requires mechanism, and the complete integrity of the mechanism, quite as much as the other. In fact, the musical vibrations within the box depend so much for their qualities upon the wood out of which the violin is made, that extraordinary sums have been paid for a Stradivarius on that account alone. But thought mechanism be such an essential element in both, the entrance of a wholly different factor in the case of the violin, namely the musician, makes it possible to harmonize the analogies to brain function drawn from these two instruments. In the one, we have only the effects of external forces acting upon material things, while in the other, we likewise have material things, but the effects come from a source entirely distinct from, and wholly independent of them. We only need now to follow up each of these views of their inevitable conclusions to recognize how far apart they are. The one regards the mind as wholly of the brain, and hence the mind can have no existence apart from the brain. The other regards the brain as nothing more than the instrument of the mind, and no instrument can possibly be identical with the agency which uses it. As the brain itself gave no least sign of its activities, so much so that, as already mentioned, the world for ages did not suspect that it had any connection with thought or feeling, it was natural that the discussion should center first about the terms mind and body. As regards the mind, the processes themselves of thought appear to offer in their genesis and sequence the only elements for examination. Metaphysicians, therefore, have labored at the problem for centuries, but without coming to any agreement, one chief reason for their failure being that in their methods of investigation they have had no relying upon introspection. But the difficulty with introspection is that it is like a man trying to lift himself by his own bootstraps. As our mental processes both begin and end within ourselves, they offer little which is objective for us to go by. We need instead some external fulcrum to draw upon for satisfactory inferences. Such a fulcrum seems at last to be promised to us by modern discoveries connected with the brain itself, in its relations, and an organism to certain defined mental functions. This was not possible so long as the brain was regarded as a single organ working as a unit, with the same relations in all its parts to consciousness, and thought that the hair cells were ever located in the lungs bear to respiration. Look at us. The physiologist with the brain before him was even worse off than the metaphysician, for nothing could be more undemonstrative to mere inspection than healthy brain matter. Physiologists, but therefore, were obliged to investigate the brain, bit by bit, to find whether some parts of it were more connected with certain physical functions than others. After the most exhaustive experiments were made on the brains of living animals, certain important facts were demonstrated which have most direct bearing on the problem. Moreover, these experimental deductions have been further confirmed by observations of the effect of local brain damage caused in man by injuries or disease. By this means, it is now proven that the grey matter of the brain surface is specially arranged to subserve certain specific physical functions only in certain localities in its substance. It is not the whole brain which sees or hears, but only particular limited areas to which the consciousness of sight and of hearing respectively are confined. Likewise, the voluntary movements of each group of muscles in the body have been found to proceed from central well-defined starting points on the brain surface, and these are so well demonstrated that the surgeon often knows by noting what muscles are implicated, just where to open the skull with his trephine so as to find a lesion or injury in the brain. On these grounds, the inference seems probable that every special physical function is subserved by its own special seat in the material organ of the mind. Hence, by these discoveries, we do seem to have come into possession of really objective facts, where before everything was subjective. Because nothing could